All right, we are back. Our next guest is an investigative journalist from Germany who has worked closely with whistleblowers in his work with doping, amongst other things. Hajo Seppelt, how are you doing?
It's fine, thank
Yeah,
you.
how are you enjoying Play the Game?
Very interesting conference. I think it's the best in the whole world. I joined at the first time in late 90s, early 2000 years. And so it was growing and growing, and seeing now 450 delegates from different countries, many different countries, and seeing the outcome, then if you compare it with other sports conference or conference on sports politics, I think it's a global number one.
Really, that's good. Can you maybe begin to talk by talking a little bit about the experiences that you've made when working with whistleblowers?
Different experiences, as you can imagine. It's always very risky and a sensitive subject. How to approach them, how to get in touch with them, how to build up trust. If you want to get along with them in a way that at the end, at the bottom line, there's enough protection for them, but also there's a benefit from a journalistic perspective for us. So you have always to find a balance between both of these interests. And usually, I don't prefer to talk to whistleblowers on the phone or to just exchange emails. The best thing is always to get in touch with them directly, to meet them face to face, and to discuss the concerns they have and discuss my request, and then we can sort out what is the best way to move on.
What are some of the ethical questions you ask yourself, or like your process of when you begin? Do they usually get in touch with you? Do you usually? And then what are some of the questions that you ask yourself as a journalist when?
I have to ask the question, what might be the risk for the whistleblower if he gets public? So we have to sort out if it's better to hide him. That means he's a kind of anonymous source. That means we do a hidden interview, for example. That means you cannot identify the person. Behind a wall, behind a screen, for example, and you make sure that people cannot identify some details of that person, for example, the voice or how they react, how they move their hands, their gestics, their mimics. That is always necessary to consider. But if they agree to go in public, then we have to sort out what is the risk for them. And for example, when we did the story about Russia in 2014, the two whistleblowers, Vitaly Stepanov and his wife Yulia, decided to go on camera, but the precondition for the airing of sound bites or of the interview was that they must be safe, and that means they must have left the country before we air the documentary exactly that happened.
And then you were speaking of two different examples earlier today.
There was another example. It was also a Russian whistleblower, and he decided at the beginning to stay in his country, in Russia. He wanted to blow the whistle, but he wanted to stay at his home place. I asked him beforehand if he is really aware of the possible risks he might face in the future, and he said yes, and I want to do that. So I thought, okay, it's now his responsibility because he decided to do so. It's his own decision. But after a couple of weeks, he realized that obviously not only the risk but also the consequences have been bigger than expected and much more negative. So he didn't want to stay anymore in Russia, and he told me, I want to leave the country. So this was a surprising development, but what can we do? So it was necessary for me to sort out what we can do, and I felt that I'm in some way obliged here to help and to support that. We are more or less responsible for the current situation, at least indirectly. So I try to manage and to sort out what might be the best way to help him. So some people in Germany helped us to get him from Russia to Germany finally, but he had to travel a lot before it was possible to get him to Germany. And so far as I know, I have not seen him for a couple of weeks now, but the last what I can say is that he was very, very confident and happy with situation. So he didn't regret what he has done, or he was happy to be. At that point, at least, he was happy to be outside from Russia.
Right. Do you sometimes have to protect whistleblowers from themselves, like say, no, I can't use you, even though they might want to?
For a journalist, it's a quite tricky question, because the goal number one what I have is to make things public. Mm-hmm. So that means if you are sitting between the chairs, because on one hand you want to get things told and unveiled, on the other hand you see what might be the risk for that. So in the example which I told you about the whistleblower from Russia who didn't want to leave the country at the beginning, at least, I asked him really straight ahead. I asked him, are you really sure that it is a right step for you? Have you considered the possible risk for the future? And I gave him a certain time to think about it, and then he came back to me and told me, yes, I want to do that. So I think that is what I can do. But if I would see that a person is not able to really calculate the risk for himself, then I would maybe step back and say, okay, maybe we should not do that.
What or maybe who posed the greatest risk to whistleblowers, in your opinion?
That depends on the situation. You cannot say that generally. I don't know.
Based on your experience, then?
You mean who are the biggest critics for them, who might be dangerous for them? Yeah, in Russia, that's Russian media and maybe some crazy people who cannot respect the freedom of speech and feel in a way hurt because people talk about in a negative way about their country. But to be honest, I have a problem. I'm struggling to tell you how big the risk is, because luckily nothing happened so far. So I don't know. It's hard for me to estimate the risk.
So sport organizations aren't exactly known for being transparent. Does that mean that whistleblowers are especially necessary in sport journalism?
No. Whistleblowers are necessary in every part of society, because to hide things and to cover up things, that is not only a matter of sports. Also, I have to admit that in sports, let's say the political circumstances are a little different to other parts of politics, because sports is organized in a way which I would call completely anachronistic. This has not so much to do with democratic structures as we know it in Western Europe, at least. And I'm a strong supporter of the idea that people should share their opinions. There should be in a debate and a discussion, and the so-called unity of sport, to speak with one voice, I don't think that's the correct way. I think that sports needs much more democracy and much more power for the people who are the core of sport. That means the athletes. Yeah,
and do whistleblowers play a crucial part in that process then?
Yes, they can, at least.
You were talking about how you were able to get this Russian whistleblower to Germany. What can journalists do to protect their sources and whistleblowers in this particular case?
That means to hide everything what might be dangerous for them, what might damage them. That is protection. That's very easy. And number one duty we have is to protect the people who come to us, who approach us to deliver information. That is a really, really big thing from my point of view. So then you have to take care of these people. That's to be honest, that's not a really difficult answer for me.
Yeah. But are the means of which we can use as journalists to protect our sources good enough? Do we have like a...
How we can have that?
I don't
We never can have that. How can I guarantee someone 100% security? That simply doesn't work. Yeah.
You were also talking about your own experience when you've covered doping and the dangers that is posed on journalists when they work on certain issues in sport. Are journalists protected enough in their profession?
That again depends on what they are doing. If they are doing what I am doing, that means digging in the dark side of sports, and again, never knowing exactly what the real risk on that. You just can have some ideas, but it doesn't mean necessarily that you really know what people want to do in order to avoid your coverage. I cannot tell you that, but what I would say is that also on the field of sports, if you criticize people and you destroy business models, you destroy the win-win situation for the stakeholders of sports because you just simply report on that and they don't like it, then I don't know what will be the final risk on that. So if it becomes so dangerous that you need 24/7 security around you, then I think then we should think about what we are doing.
You were also calling for a kind of a shift in sports journalism.
Yes.
Can you elaborate a bit on that?
Yes, I think that sports journalism is too much focused on entertainment. Journalism in sports is for me the same as it would be in other fields of society, politics, economics, whatever it is, culture. So we have to use the same tools, and we have to do more or less the same. That we need more distance to what we are doing. We shouldn't be too close to the people we are reporting on. So there are a lot of concerns where I would see in sports journalism that we don't fulfill these criteria. So that's very worrying, and many sport journalists are focusing on event journalism. That means they want to watch a football match and they cover the football match, which is also important and necessary. I don't say that is not necessary, but if it's more or less all what fills the papers and the programs on TV, on radio, then I would say we make a mistake, because sports is much more, and we need to take a look behind the curtains and have to see the other side of the medal, and not only the surface, but what happens for it's more or less a tradition for me in sports journalism that we are just focusing on what we see, but we don't ask the real serious questions and the important questions we have to ask. And facing now this situation with Russia next week, when the IOC will take its decision on Russia, if they are allowed to compete at the Olympic Winter Games or not. You see, there are so many different aspects you have to consider, which have nothing to do with winning or losing on the field of sports, but there's much more legal stuff to consider, political interests, and I think that we need more higher intellectual level in sports journalism in general.
Do you think that's in the future for sports journalism?
That depends on the people, on the young people. That depends on the education. That depends on the will of people who are responsible, who are in charge, in media outlets, in networks, in publishers, whatever, to focus on that and to understand that it's not okay if you have sports journalists who are just counting the results of a football match or the goals. That I think is not the way it should be done.
Okay, on that note, thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you to everyone who's joined us on Facebook, both today and all over the whole course of this conference. You can follow our follow-up coverage of Play the Game on our social media at onthegame17. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and we also have a lovely website, onthegame17.com. Thank you so much. Have a good day.